The Giant's Causeway on the coast of Northern Ireland is one of the UK's outstanding natural features. Its steep cliffs and deep bays form a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
The strangest part of Ireland's most mysterious stone door is not that people thought they saw it move. The strangest part is how ready they were to believe that a wall of black volcanic rock on the coast of Antrim might really be hiding a passage into something older, deeper, and more deliberate than nature itself. For a few moments, the image seemed to confirm every instinct the Giant's Causeway has stirred for centuries. Stone looked like architecture. Basalt looked engineered. And a coastline already saturated with legend seemed to whisper that perhaps the old stories had never been stories at all. The setting matters because the Giant's Causeway is not an ordinary landscape waiting for an ordinary explanation. It is one of the most visually unsettling natural formations in Europe, a place where around 40,000 interlocking basalt columns descend toward the sea in an arrangement so precise that first-time visitors still struggle to accept that no hand placed them there. UNESCO calls it a site of global geological importance and exceptional natural beauty. The British Geological Survey explains that the columns formed roughly 60 million years ago when lava cooled slowly, contracted, and fractured into the regular polygonal shapes that still define the coastline. But facts alone have never exhausted what people feel when they stand there. For at least 300 years, the causeway has belonged to two histories at once. One is geological, a history of fire, continental rupture, cooling rock, erosion, glaciation, and rising seas. The other is mythic, a history carried by oral tradition, guide tales, poetry, and the durable figure of Finn McCool, later anglicized as Finn McCool. In the most famous legend, Finn builds the causeway across the sea to confront the Scottish giant Bonandanner. In another tradition preserved by the National Trust, he builds not for war but for love, trying to reach a Scottish maiden before storms destroy his work. Both stories reveal the same human impulse. Faced with a landscape this dramatic, people do not merely describe it. They narrate it. That is exactly why the moving stone door became such an irresistible idea. The Giant's Causeway already looks as if it belongs to a world where stone might obey story. Its columns resemble pillars. Its cliffs resemble walls. Named formations like the Giant's Boot and the Giant's Organ make the coastline feel less like scenery than like evidence left behind by some absent colossal life. When a video appears to show a basalt face opening or closing like a hidden door, the imagination does not experience a shock so much as a confirmation. It feels as though the landscape is finally behaving the way it always looked capable of behaving. But the truth, when it emerged, was more revealing than the fantasy. Reuters reported that the apparent doorway in the Giant's Causeway rock face was not the exposure of a secret chamber or a buried structure from deep antiquity. It was part of a promotional campaign designed to play with the mythology of a sleeping giant and a magical doorway. The clip worked not because it documented an archaeological revelation, but because it understood the emotional structure of the place. It knew that the causeway already sits at the meeting point of geology and legend, and that modern audiences, for all their skepticism, still hunger for the possibility that certain landscapes are withholding something from them. That hunger deserves attention, because it explains far more than the video itself. If millions of people briefly entertained the idea that Ireland's most famous basalt coast had finally opened itself like a mechanism, that does not simply prove gullibility. It proves that some places remain charged in the imagination long after science has explained their physical formation. The causeway is one of those places. Explanation has never diminished it. If anything, explanation made it stranger. Lava flooding an ancient landscape as the supercontinent Laurasia broke apart, a lava lake cooling with such eerie regularity that it cracked into near-perfect columns, long periods of dormancy followed by weathering, glaciers scraping away upper layers, waves steadily exposing the black geometry beneath. That is not a banal story. It is a story of violence becoming order. Long before internet culture discovered how easily wonder can be edited into a clip, artists and writers were already struggling to capture the same tension at the causeway. In the 18th century, Susanna Drury's celebrated views of the Giant's Causeway brought the site-wide attention because they rendered the formation with a seriousness that still preserved its air of unreality. The Reverend William Hamilton, in his 1786 work Letters concerning the northern coast of the county of Antrim, offered one of the first detailed descriptions of the region's basalt and helped place the causeway within a larger volcanic context. Yet, even careful observation did not strip the place of mythic power. It only sharpened the paradox. The more precisely the rock was studied, the more extraordinary it seemed. Patrick N. Wise Jackson later described the Giant's Causeway as central to one of geology's historic debates over the nature of basalt. That matters because it reminds us that the site was once scientifically mysterious as well as culturally enchanted. For earlier observers, the columns were not merely beautiful. They were controversial evidence in a larger argument about how the Earth itself worked. In other words, the causeway has always drawn people into a struggle between competing explanations. Was it built by giants, shaped by divine design, or formed by volcanic processes not yet fully understood? The modern viral doorway simply updated that old conflict in digital form. And perhaps that is why the episode feels so revealing. It shows how little the modern mind has changed when confronted by pattern that feels too exact, too theatrical, too emotionally loaded to be only natural. Human beings are deeply vulnerable to structure that resembles intention. We look at repeated polygons, vertical pillars, and wall-like cliff faces, and some buried. Part of the mind begins searching for builders. The causeway triggers that response almost perfectly. It is geology that wears the mask of architecture. It is nature speaking in a grammar that looks suspiciously designed. That resemblance is not trivial. It is one of the reasons folklore flourished here in the first place. A landscape becomes mythically active when it looks as though it already contains plot, character, and motive. At the Giant's Causeway, even the names given to formations do narrative work. The giant's boot implies a body. The giant's organ implies music, craft, interiority. The coast becomes populated by traces. Once that interpretive habit settles in, a secret doorway is not an outrageous leap. It is simply the next chapter in a story the rocks have been inviting people to tell for generations. Yet the real secret of the so-called stone door is not hidden in the cliff. It is hidden in us. The campaign succeeded because it activated a desire stronger than curiosity. It activated longing. Modern life offers endless information but very little enchantment. Most spaces we inhabit have been measured, mapped, commercialized, and explained into flatness. Then a place like the Giant's Causeway appears, and suddenly the world seems old again, resistant again, full of sealed meanings. The fantasy of a moving rock face is compelling not only because it suggests giants. It suggests that the visible world might still contain thresholds. That feeling becomes even stronger when you consider the atmosphere of the site itself. The Atlantic weather changes by the minute. Mist can flatten depth until the horizon feels uncertain. Light turns the basalt from black to silver to blue-gray depending on cloud and hour. The cliffs rise in layered bands that preserve the history of eruptions and pauses, action and waiting. Sea and stone exist in constant argument there. Under those conditions, folklore stops feeling decorative. It starts feeling like an older, emotionally honest way of reading landscape. When earlier generations said a giant crossed here, they were not making a scientific claim. They were describing what the place feels like. That distinction matters, especially now. Debunking a false mystery is important, but it is not the same thing as understanding why the mystery was attractive. The stone door can be false at the level of literal fact, and still true at the level of psychological revelation. It reveals that the Giant's Causeway remains one of those rare places where explanation and wonder live side by side without canceling each other out. The National Trust can explain the volcanic history and still preserve the Finn McCool legends. UNESCO can classify the site in scientific terms while acknowledging the giant stories it inspired. The place does not force a choice between myth and geology. It lets both remain visible, each giving the other emotional depth. This is why the better question is not whether the door was real. It was not. The better question is why the idea of it felt so instantly native to the landscape. Why did it seem plausible, even for a heartbeat, that a basalt wall on the Antrim coast could open like a sealed entrance? The answer is that the Giant's Causeway already feels like a threshold. It stands between land and sea, science and story, measured process and mythic scale. It is a boundary place, and boundary places have always attracted tales of openings, crossings, disappearances, and hidden interiors. Even the geology contributes to that mood. The British Geological Survey describes how lava initially drained into valleys and accumulated at the Causeway as a great lava lake, cooling slowly enough to produce regular stress patterns through the entire mass. Read clinically, that is geology. Read imaginatively, it sounds like buried intention. A lake of fire hardening into order beneath the earth. Pressure creating pattern. Structure emerging from violence. No wonder people keep trying to place a door somewhere in it. The scientific story already carries the emotional rhythm of myth. There is another layer of history behind the legend, and it matters because the Causeway was never only a local marvel. It became a symbol that traveled. Drury's images circulated. Hamilton's descriptions circulated. The arguments over basalt circulated. By the time the 19th century matured, the Giant's Causeway had become a place where art, science, imperial travel, and Irish identity could all overlap uneasily in the same frame. That complexity still hangs over the site. Every visitor arrives with some version of the place already in mind, inherited from postcards, school lessons, poems, travel television, or childhood myth. The modern door story slipped easily into that inheritance because it behaved like a new layer on a very old palimpsest. And then there is the emotional geometry of the coast itself. The columns descend in ways that suggest procession. The sea interrupts them with force. The cliffs behind them keep their own darker counsel. It is not difficult to understand why people speak more softly there, or why so many photographs from the site fail to capture what the eye and body register at once. The Causeway produces scale and intimacy together. You can stand on a single column and feel the exact fit of your feet, yet look up and feel reduced by a system of stone that seems to extend beyond you in all directions, outward into the sea and backward into geological time. But the actual Giant's Causeway does not need fabricated surprises to remain profound. Its real story is larger than any invented chamber. It contains the opening of the North Atlantic, the rupture of ancient continental connection, the chemistry of weathering, the sculpting force of glaciers, the patience of marine erosion, the work of generations of artists, travelers and scholars, and the persistence of oral tradition in a modern tourist landscape. That complexity is more durable than spectacle. A fake doorway may seize attention for a day. The real Causeway has held human attention for centuries. There is also something slightly unsettling about how quickly the modern world demands revelation from a landscape instead of attention. Too often, viewers want the one forbidden passage, the one dark secret, the one cinematic twist that can be packaged into a title and thumbnail. But great places do not surrender themselves in a single dramatic moment. They deepen slowly. The Causeway is powerful precisely because the longer you look, the larger it becomes. It refuses reduction. The columns are beautiful, but they are also records. The myths are charming, but they are also cultural memory. The tourism is modern, but the emotional charge underneath it is ancient. In that sense, the moving stone door did reveal a secret after all, just not the secret it claimed. It revealed that human beings still respond to the earth as if it were speaking through form. We still see pattern and feel addressed by it. We still encounter certain cliffs, caves, columns, and coastlines as though they carry intention, warning, invitation, or grief. We still project narrative onto stone because some part of us refuses to believe that beauty of this magnitude can be mute. The door was not real, but the impulse behind it is very real. It is old. It is persistent. And at places like the Giant's Causeway, it becomes almost impossible to resist. Maybe that is why the image lingers even after the fact check. Not because people still believe there is a giant's hall behind the basalt, but because the clip touched a deeper truth. Some landscapes do not merely sit in the world as scenery. They confront us. They test the boundary between knowledge and desire. They ask whether explanation is enough, or whether we still need meaning in a form science alone cannot supply. The Giant's Causeway has always asked that question. The viral doorway only dramatized it for an age trained to consume mystery in seconds. And still, if you stand on those columns in bad weather, with the sea hammering below and the cliffs dark above, it is easy to understand why the old stories endure. You feel the scale of forces that made the place, but you also feel the scale of feeling it invites. Pride, fear, wonder, melancholy, even love, in the lesser-known story of Finn building across the water towards someone he cannot reach. That emotional layering is the real inheritance of the Causeway. It is not just a geological marvel or a folklore site. It is a rare landscape in which natural process and human meaning have fused so completely that each seems to illuminate the other. So no, Ireland's most mysterious stone door did not finally expose a hidden civilization, a forbidden tunnel, or the sleeping chamber of a mythic giant. What it exposed was something more enduring and, in its own way, more haunting. It exposed the readiness with which a legendary landscape can awaken ancient habits of belief inside modern minds. It exposed how myth survives by attaching itself to form, pattern, atmosphere, and desire. And it exposed the fact that the Giant's Causeway, despite every guidebook, drone shot, and scientific explanation, still feels like a place where the world has not told us everything. That may be the only secret worth keeping. Not a chamber inside the rock, but the stubborn possibility that some places remain larger than our categories for them. The Causeway is volcanic fact, national symbol, tourist destination, intellectual battleground, painted wonder, and mythic stage all at once. It is the meeting point between what the earth did and what people needed it to mean. The fake stone door passed quickly. The deeper doorway remains. It opens whenever stone becomes story, whenever explanation meets longing, whenever a coastline of cooled fire convinces the human mind that it is standing at the edge of something older than history and somehow still unfinished. And maybe that is the emotional reason the legend refuses to die. A door promises not just an object, but a crossing. It promises that the world we know has an edge, and that beyond that edge something waits, whether it is danger, revelation, grief, or awe. The Giant's Causeway has always generated that sensation without needing any mechanical trick. It already feels like a place where one realm touches another, where deep time presses against memory, where scientific clarity and mythic darkness share the same wind and spray. That is a far more durable mystery than any staged movement in a cliff face. So when people say Ireland's most mysterious stone door finally revealed its secret, the truthful answer is yes, but not in the way they mean. It revealed that the real opening was never in the basalt. It was in perception. It was in the human need to turn immense natural order into narrative, to treat pattern as message, to answer beauty with story. That need is not childish. It is ancient. It is one of the ways we survive scale. Standing before something as old, violent, and composed as the Giant's Causeway, we reach for giants, lovers, rivals, magic, and doors because plain description feels too small for what the place does to the mind. And that is why the Giant's Causeway will keep drawing people back, not because it once seemed to move, but because it still does something rarer. It makes the world feel inhabited by meaning before that meaning is fully spoken. It makes history feel unfinished. It makes geology feel intimate. It makes myth feel plausible for just long enough to remind us how thin the distance is between knowledge and wonder. The false door closed quickly. The deeper one remains open. It waits in the black columns, in the Atlantic mist, in the old names still attached to stone, and in the silence that falls when a human being finally stops looking for a trick and simply looks. That silence is the real secret the coast has been keeping all along. That memory clings harder